Okay, so let's say the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitchanu v'mitzvotav v'shivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen. All right, great. So I think we're going to be, we got up to somewhere in chapter
At 12.
12. Yeah.
Kerry, Kim has 13 lined up. That's
You
the
see that,
start.
yeah.
You've
Okay.
got
I'm just going to try
post written Torah. You've got paragraph breaks at 15 and again at 20 at the end of 29, which is the end of the chapter.
Yeah, let's see if we can't read through to the end of the chapter. And because most of this is going to be stuff that we have covered at least indirectly before. So if somebody would like to volunteer to read starting in verse 12, we will be ready to go.
I will.
Oh, all right, Sharon, you're on.
The boundaries shall then descend along the Jordan and terminate at the Dead Sea. That shall be your land as defined by its boundaries on all sides.
Okay.
Moses instructed the Israelites, saying, "This is the land you are to receive by lot as your hereditary portion, which the Lord has commanded to be given to the 9.5 tribes. For the Reubenite tribe by its ancestral houses, the Gadite tribe by its ancestral houses, and the half tribe of Manasseh have already received their portions. Those 2.5 tribes have received their portions across the Jordan, opposite Jericho on the east, the Orient side. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, These are the names of the men through whom the land shall be apportioned for you, Eleazar the priest and Joshua son of Nun. And you shall also take a chieftain from each tribe through whom the land shall be apportioned. These are the names of the men from the tribe of Judah: Caleb, son of Jephunneh; from the Simeonite tribe, Samuel, son of Ammihud; from the tribe of Benjamin, Elidad, son of Chislon; from the Danite tribe, a chieftain, Buki, son of Yogli; for the descendants of Joseph from the Manasseh tribe, a chieftain, Haniel, son of Ephod; and from the Ephraimite tribe, a chieftain, Kemuel, son of Shiftan; from the Zebulunite tribe, a chieftain, Elizaphan, son of Parnach; from the Issacharite tribe, a chieftain, Paltiel, son of Azan; from the Asherite tribe, a chieftain, Ahihud, son of Shelomi; from the Naphthalite tribe, a chieftain, Pedahel, son of Ammihud. It was those whom the Lord designated to allot portions to the Israelites in the land of Canaan.
Okay, so this has some very interesting features that might not be so obvious to a casual reading. First, many of these names are names that are derived from a combination of the name with the name of God or something else of a spiritual or divine nature. So some of these are kind of clear. Now I have pictures of everybody's lovely face with no text. It just disappeared. I wonder why that is. Can I get the text back, Kim? Okay, so just to get a sense of this, let's look at a couple of these names and see what we find out. Okay, this should. Why? Oh, I was on the wrong one. Here we go. Yeah. Oh, okay.
Went a little too far.
Yeah, no kidding.
Okay, there you go.
All right, so first of all, where exactly is this territory?
Well, the part in the very beginning is on the east side of the Jordan, opposite Jericho.
Right.
The rest of it would be on the west side of Jordan, between there and probably the Mediterranean.
That's right. And that's where as they refer to it here in the passage, the 9.5 tribes. So you have 2 whole tribes, which are situated east of the Jordan River, and one which is halfway across the Jordan River, and the other half is west of the Jordan River. This is, we spoke briefly about the nature of these kinds of texts and how much historical credence are given to them. I mean, to me, they are historical texts in the same way that any number of other texts are historical. They have, they are a text to pay attention to. They are not necessarily literally true because we can't necessarily figure out, for example, where a half tribe would be located. But the best guess, and it's only a guess, is that some part of the tribe's territory was located east of the Jordan, some west of the Jordan. So the Jordan kind of ran through part of that area. But what I wanted to point out is that the land of Israel, as defined by this text, if we think of it as an historical text, among other historical texts, gives us an idea of what's meant by the land of Israel. And it is the place that is partially on both sides of the Jordan River, but the kingdom that becomes kingdom of Judea later on is wholly on the west bank.
Also, don't the tribes, from what we read last week or the week before, the tribes that are on the east side are only permitted to be there so long as, when there is a common threat, they participate in defending or extending the holdings.
Exactly right. They are required, in order to be part of the people as a whole, they have to participate along with the other tribes in the acquisition of the land on the west side of the Jordan River, which they do. And then they return to the eastern side of the Jordan River, which is where they're going to have their main holding. But they include themselves in, and are recognized as part of the people by participating in the quote unquote context. Yes, Dan.
Yeah, just from my knowledge, what tribe does Joshua belong to? I'm assuming because Joshua and Eleazar are going to apportion the land. Eleazar is a priest, so there wouldn't be.
So they're part of the
necessarily.
tribe of Levi.
Which one? Ephraim?
Well, Ephraim is a tribe unto itself. Ephraim is, but Levi is also a tribe, but it does not have its own territory.
Right. But which tribe did you say Joshua was of?
I don't think I did, but
Oh,
Joshua belonged to the tribe of Judah, I think.
Judah. Okay.
So, which becomes the most important tribe politically, and also the most powerful and the most populous of all the tribes.
It's also the name, is it not, after the kingdom split, Judea?
Yes, it's Judea and Samaria, which you, of course, have heard in a modern political context. This is the territory that people are still arguing about, even today, whether or not this was legitimately a part of the land of Israel or not. The evidence of the biblical text is that it was, but the biblical text as an historical source is not, it is like any other historical source. It exists within the context of other documents and other evidence. And is it literally true? Well, it's literally true in the same way that if you look at an early map of the 13 colonies, Virginia extends all the way westward to the Ohio River. I mean, well, it never actually did, but that's the theoretical extent of that particular colony. So what we do have here to begin with is that what binds the tribes together is not entirely the holding of contiguous land, but the participation in the acquisition of the land that God designates for the Jewish people. Whether the tribe is on the east side of the Jordan or the west side of the Jordan doesn't qualify it or disqualify it for being part of that group. So the interesting question then becomes, this is a kind of model, you might say, that eventually becomes what? That the Jewish people is not ultimately determined by the specific land, geographical identity that it has, because it has acquired land in a particular place.
It seems like it's like our states and the country.
I think that if I'm understanding you right, I would agree with that. Why don't you give me a little bit more information about what you mean?
Well, in the United States, each one is kind of, could be thought of as a tribe, but then they work together as a country, especially when there's a foreign invader.
Yeah, and this goes to a political model called the Amphictyony, which is basically a dressed up term for, using the analogy that you just gave us, Kim, the idea of a confederation. What is the difference between confederation and a nation state? Well, the confederation is composed of smaller groups, which for limited and particular purposes is a part of a larger entity, but is not bound entirely by the obligations or the privileges or what have you of that larger territory.
And so you think this is new for this time?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
And yeah, basically there are certain purposes for which all of the tribes act together, each of the tribes giving the assent of that tribe. And this is part of the way in which Israel governs itself, so to speak, through the period of the judges, Deborah and so on and so forth, that they come together for certain specific purposes, but they are not equally part of the nation in a political sense, except for participation in those purposes. So for the purpose of conquering the land, they are all a part of that, but that's a limited and specific purpose. Yeah, Stan.
Yeah, I was just thinking on Kim's analogy. Kim, I think it might be closer to the Articles of Confederation.
Yeah, well, that's exactly,
preceded the Constitution.
yeah, I think that's what he had in mind. Yeah, so the Articles of Confederation, similarly, the states are linked and are part of one entity insofar as they are beholden to a political ideology that for certain specific purposes, they have a common interest and a common position, but that for other purposes or other positions, the tribes or the colonies are on their own. Why doesn't that stay the form of government that the Israelite tribes had? Why do they abandon that, and what do they abandon that for?
Well, there's an explanation in the Tanakh, is there not, that the people wanted a king so they would be like the other nations around them. And the high priest at the time didn't like the idea, but acquiesced and anointed Saul.
Well, yeah, that's true, but that's exactly the kind of post facto explanation that we look forward to. It's not a causative factor.
Okay.
So what on a using the analogy of the Articles of Confederation, why didn't they succeed? Why is that form of government abandoned by the colonies?
It was too weak.
Yeah, you can say, all right, we are bound together for this particular purpose and that particular purpose, but that turns out to be a less than successful form of governance. And for that reason, the Articles of Confederation is replaced by the constitutional government, where the factors that link the different colonies together are seen in a more defined and in a stronger way, and there is a much more powerful central organization, so that everybody is kind of bound together. So in the ancient Israelite setup, it turns out that the idea of 2.5 tribes sort of being on their own doesn't work out so well. And they don't remain in that configuration. In the end, the half tribe of Manasseh and then the 2 whole tribes that reside on the east side of the Jordan become part of the entire Israelite people and are responsible to a central government. So what happens here? In the period of time of this, if you want to call it confederacy, there are cultic centers in many different tribes. They have their own, each of them, their own temple, their own place where they are expected to perform the sacrifices. But the move towards a single temple where all the sacrifices take place, namely the temple in Jerusalem, is a reflection of the growing unification of all of these tribes and the elements of self-interest that the tribes may have might still exist, but in a much more attenuated form. Now, and there is an ongoing machloket, debate about what the responsibility of each of the tribes is towards the collectivity, which is now the God's kingdom or God's government. What exactly is owed to the central authority as represented by the temple in Jerusalem, and how much latitude does each of these tribes have to pursue its own interests and its own policy? You can look at the opposition to the central temple in Jerusalem as the key reflection of whether or not there is a unified kingdom or a confederation, if you like to use that term, of independent or semi-independent tribes. The growing reality is that the confederacy idea loses power and is replaced increasingly by a centralized kingdom. And that centralization is marked by 2 things. It's marked by the presence of the national shrine where sacrifices take place in one temple, one in Jerusalem. The others are seen as increasingly at odds with that one temple. So the unification is demonstrated by the increasing centralization of the cult. as this process moves forward, there is an effort to marginalize or to destroy these other cultic centers at Dan, at Shiloh, and et cetera, et cetera. And for that reason, it's that is not a cause of the unification. It is a reflection of the unification. And you can also imagine that part of the issue of conquering or coming to control this territory, which already is home to a number of different tribes and nations and so forth, would require a greater unity than just groups opting in or out depending upon their self-interest. Yeah, I see your hand, Stan.
A couple of quick questions.
Yeah.
Once the kingdom was united under Saul, David, and Solomon, did the 2.5 tribes remain on the east side of the Jordan?
Yes.
Okay. The other thing is you mentioned, and then we succeeded in taking you off on a tangent. You were going to talk about the reflection of God in the names of some of the people who were appointed heads of the different tribes.
Yeah, that's an interesting part of this particular passage. So let's take a look at them, some of these names. All right, see, can I do this?
I think it starts about verse 16.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get this to scroll.
No, maybe, I think I have.
There it is. Okay.
You got it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're looking at.
You're in Numbers 35. You're a chapter ahead.
Yeah, I am. I just realized that.
So what chapter are we in?
34.
And what verse, please?
16.
Thank you.
We started at 12 or 13.
Right, but the names started, I think, at 16, Kim.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, let's back up a little bit more. 14, 13. All right. So let's start at 14. So for the Reubenite tribe by its ancestral houses, the Gadite tribe by its ancestral houses, and the half tribe of Manasseh have already received their portions. So they may come into the land of Israel proper, help with the settlement or the conquest, whatever we're going to call it. But the assumption is that their own territory, that's designated for them, remains the land on the east side of the river, which is, I propose, Stan's question before.
Did they absorb the peoples who were there already before them when they went into these areas?
Do they absorb them? It depends on what you mean.
Yeah, in other words,
Sure.
they lived there separately from the people who were already there?
Well, again, it depends on what you mean by separately. You know, the separately, yeah, in the sense that they don't necessarily become part of the population of Israelites because they're not Israelites.
Right.
But like the mixed multitude, they're living among the Israelites. And so they have a certain kind of status based on their willingness to follow the laws. But it doesn't make them part of the group.
Thank you.
But I think I see what Judy maybe is saying. Would they be more part of one tribe than the stranger? Would they be more part of one tribe than another?
Well, they live wherever they live. They're living in the geography of a tribe.
I see.
So they are all living in the physical confines of the boundaries of a particular tribe. So they have to, if they're going to have status in those places, it's going to be because they are going to follow the laws and the rules of that tribe.
Uh-huh.
But bear in mind that what we're getting at here, and I think I'm trying to indicate that by the growing forcefulness of the idea of there being ultimately one cultic center, all of the tribes are going through a process of becoming more and more strongly identified with this unitary center that collects itself around the tribe of Jerusalem, the temple in Jerusalem. This is part of the process of becoming a unified nation. It's the analogy to the Articles of Confederation is very good, because that's exactly what happened in the United States. We had a number of different capitals during the period of the Confederacy. New York City or Philadelphia were, for example, both capitals of the United States. Ultimately, though, what did they do? They they created a central locus for the government. And in fact, they went so far as to make sure that this geographic spot where the you want to call them cultic center would be, namely the tribe, the temple would be in a particular place in Jerusalem, even though that was not the capital beforehand. You're following me?
Mhm.
Yeah, so let's take a look at some of these names now. And so we have,
I think Remy had a question.
oh, I'm sorry, Remy.
Sure. Yeah, I have a question regarding the cultic practices among the tribes before the movement going to the centrality of in Jerusalem. My question to you, are the cultic sacrifices or centers, are they pure Judaism, or there are elements of paganism before they moved to Jerusalem?
Well, this is not a zero-sum game. You know, the cultic centers like the ones in, let's say, Shiloh, are not, let me say it the other way around, existed prior to the founding of the temple in Jerusalem. The founding of the temple in Jerusalem was an act which reflected the growing consciousness of Israel being one nation and not having separate cultic centers that represented separate institutions of power during the days of this tribal or confederacy period. No, these things tend to follow certain rules. So, for example, during the period of the Confederacy in the United States, one of their major problems was getting enough taxes appropriated by the different states to support the activities of the temple in Jerusalem and the other elements that were part of that national center. But that was exactly what gets fought out. Eventually, the taxes all go to support the temple in Jerusalem, and they don't go to Dan or Shiloh or places like that, which eventually get frozen out. Now they remain of some historical importance, but there's always a battle, always a controversy between the advocates of the single temple in Jerusalem and the various dispersed throughout the country sacrificial centers. As the forces for an increasingly unified Israel become stronger, then the authority of the different tribes to have counter institutions decreases. And those counter institutions get looked at more and more in a marginal way. They don't necessarily cease to exist like turning on a light switch. This is a long period of struggle, which is very much like what happened in our own country. Somebody didn't just wake up one morning, Alexander Hamilton or somebody, and say, this idea of having different temples is a bad idea. Starting tomorrow, let's have one temple in Jerusalem to get rid of the others. There is a process by which the central temple of Jerusalem is established and begins to assert its power or its authority over these other cultic centers, which become increasingly marginalized. Stan?
Yeah, I was interested in one phrase that Remy used, paganism. There's no hint that any of these regional sacrificial centers introduce false elements into the sacrificial regulations, is there?
Well, not in this passage, but in other passages, yes, there is. If you remember the name of Jezebel, for example, who was a queen of in the Israelite monarchy. How come she gets such a bad rap? What did she do? Well, later on, she gets reinterpreted, and this happens all the time, as somehow being separate and distinct because of sexual identity. Same thing with later on with Mary Magdalene, who gets written out of Christian history because she becomes identified with being a prostitute. How many times do I have to tell these people that I teach now? Excuse me.
Folks, those places at Shiloh and Dan and so forth, this occurred during the divided kingdom.
Yes, yes, it did.
So if I
I think that any,
correctly, that if I understand correctly, I'm sorry, that there were elements of paganism in other areas, but
yeah,
not-
they're always railing against it in the Bible. They're talking about not you shall not worship in the high places. You shall not worship Asherot, which is an Egyptian god. And Baal.
Babylonian.
You know, there are many references to. It was always a struggle. The pull away from. It's just all over the Bible.
struggle against paganism is always there. I hear you.
Well, I don't know paganism, the worship of other gods.
Well, call it what, yeah.
Yeah.
Whatever.
It is. But I would love to hear more about these names, Rabbi, if we could get to them.
Well, I'm trying to get there.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see where we come up with the first one.
I think we go to 16.
No, now, oh, okay.
There we go. A little bit lower.
Yeah,
Here we go.
these are the names apportioned for you. Eliezer, what Eli, El means God, and Azer is a compound, which means to help. So this is a name that means God is my help. Joshua, we know that name from other parts. Ben Nun, Nun is a family name. There's no special other significance to it. Now we've got, let's see, Judah, Caleb, son of Jephunneh. All right, so anybody have, out of your knowledge about history, what does Caleb mean? Means dog. Okay, so why does somebody get a name like dog? are we saying?
Usually that's disparaging, isn't it?
You would think so, yes. You would think so.
Well, we don't know if it was in that culture, because dogs are loyal, dogs are useful, you know.
That's true. And if you are in a herding kind of system, dogs are used all the time. But you know, there's a whole nother side of the term dog. For example, it's the name of a constellation. And what else is it? I'll give you an example. Let's take the name running deer. Anybody have, does that ring a bell with anybody or suggest anything?
Well, I know that at least I read somewhere that in the Native American cultures, they would name the child after the first animal they saw, and that would become their spirit guide.
I think you're right about the first animal they saw, but minimally, at least it's true that the names are meant to connote certain qualities that are either already evident or are thought to be desirable to be, accurate descriptions for the child. So calling somebody running deer is to say that you're conferring on that child the quality or the characteristic of speed, like a deer. Same thing would be true of other animal names. They don't necessarily indicate a connection to God per se, but this is a quality which is being wished for this this child. So let's a little further.
Shmuel,
What?
Shmuel coming up there next.
Very good. Yeah. So Shmuel, anybody want to make a guess?
God heard me.
Yeah. Shema means to hear. As we all know, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. And the El is a compound of God. So God has heard. The idea being that giving birth, particularly to a male child, is an answer to a prayer which God has heard.
Well,
So
and isn't Shmuel Hannah's son? Or no, is that I skipped a priest.
yeah, the Shmuel is
Eli.
yes.
Okay.
All right, let's see. All right, here, how about Amihud?
Ami.
Mhm.
Well, what is in Hebrew? What is Am?
Nation.
Nation, as in Am Yisrael, the nation of Israel. So Ami becomes my nation, okay, and Hud.
Echad? Is it from Echad?
Well, it might be if it was a chet rather than a hey,
Okay.
but Hod means glory. So my nation is glorious. That's what that name means. Let's move down a little bit further. Okay, got Elidad, son of Chizdon. Anybody want to give a guess?
Kislon. Eli, once again, my God, but I don't know what the Dod is.
Kislon. What would the root be? Anybody want to give a guess?
Kislon.
Looking for a 3-letter root. Now the thing is that the nun at the end is particular to not to the root, but to the declension of the word. So
Kasal.
sorry,
Kasal is the root?
that's a good guess. And what does it mean?
I don't know.
Well, what's the name of the month that we are in?
Kislev.
Kislev, yeah. So there you go. Let's see what's next. Uki, son of Jogli. I'm not even sure I know what that is. All right, we're gonna just skip that one. Haniel, son of Ephod. All right. Does anybody know what the ephod was?
The ephod was part of the priestly garment, wasn't it?
Yes, it was kind of a vest that they wore. It had the 12 stones on it that represented the 12 tribes of Israel. So this is, so Haniel.
El again is God. I don't know
Right.
what Honey
Yes.
is.
Yeah. So somebody wearing the ephod would be a priest. And it represents the entire collection of tribes. Okay, and what else? Kemuel, son of Shiftan. Okay. Kemuel. Anybody?
Is that like Kamo?
That's a very good, that's a really high order guess, but no. Kuf, Mem, and then El. So what happens is it's a defective root. So it might be, you're suggesting like God. That's a possibility, but Kamo in that sense usually is spelled with a kaf, not a kuf. But it's a good guess nonetheless. So and then Shiftan. What is a shefet? Anybody? Well, shefet means a banner. Each of the tribes had its own particular banner signifying its identity and its name. So let's move on. Elizaphan, son of Harnach. Okay, so Elizaphan. You all going to get this one. Eli, my God.
Safan, like Safon?
You mean like it as in south? Possibly, but how is my God related to south? What would be south that would be connected to God? Mount Sinai. That's
Egypt?
not Egypt. Egypt is west, but Mount Sinai would be
Oh,
south.
Sinai. Okay.
Yeah. All right. So Eli Safan. My God is south. That is to say, is the God of Mount Sinai. Okay.
So is there kind of a hidden meaning here as you put all these together?
What do you mean by hidden meaning? Jim?
Well, as opposed to just historical information.
Well, when you're dealing with theosophic names, there is a spiritual dimension to them, but it's very hard to know exactly how far to drive this process. If I, all right, my name is Kerry, which is a county in Ireland. It's also a breed of dog. So does that mean that my parents had an idea that I was secretly Irish? Or that
there's the idea you've talked about and other rabbis have talked about that there's nothing superfluous in the Torah.
Well, that's true. But
and so is why include all this information?
That's not the same question.
Mm-hmm.
If we are dealing with this as an historical text, then it's important to get the names right. So if you think about clock. Oh, okay. I have to leave a little bit earlier than usual because I'm going to get some blood drawn today. So we'll end this session in just a couple of minutes. We didn't get quite as far as I wanted. On the one hand, you have the idea that these names reflect or bestow certain qualities, but you have to get the names right in order to emphasize the historical nature of the text. So, for example, I'll give you an obscure example, but it's a good one. If you go across one of the bridges, not George Washington Bridge, but one of the other bridges, to get from New York to New Jersey, if you take in the old route that takes you down Route 1 in New Jersey, you cross the Kosciuszko Bridge. So who was Kosciuszko?
I'm from New Jersey.
Okay.
He fought in the American Revolution.
He fought in the American Revolution. He was a commander of forces. He was an import, so to speak, from the Polish army. And like many of these historical figures from the period of the Revolutionary War, he represented not only expertise and authority in commanding this rabble of Americans, but it's hard to imagine now, but the American Revolution had a certain panache internationally to it. It was the first time in history that people were fighting for freedom as a way to identify the calling card, so to speak, of the nation. So you had a number of people, Kosciuszko being one of them. Who else did you have coming from some other nation or other culture because of the attractiveness of this revolutionary governmental experiment?
Lafayette.
Von Steuben and Lafayette.
Von Steuben and Lafayette are both examples of people who came because of the attraction of the possibility of democracy.
Pulaski?
Yes, Count Pulaski is another one. So these are people, all of whom fought for the American revolutionary forces because they were attracted by the idea or the ideology of a nation founded on freedom and the ideas and the authority of the people, as opposed to what? As opposed to the history of ancestral authority, which is what the nobility represented in Europe. So this, it's hard to think, today we are, after so many years of independent existence, it's hard to think of ourselves this way. But there was a period of time when people recognized the revolutionary, the radical nature of the American experiment in self-government and found this to be exciting stuff and related to the highest parts, highest elements of the modern philosophy of government, of self-government. So people like Lafayette, Pulaski, Kosciuszko, so forth, came to fight to support it. You know what it's like? If you think about the Spanish Civil War and the attraction that had for all sorts of people who are not even Spaniards, but who liked the idea of there being a government that was based upon principles of democracy and who were opposed to the right-wing fascist ideology of Francisco Franco. There were all sorts of people who joined the Republicans in order to fight on the side of democracy and so on and so forth. Hemingway being one example of that, but there are many others. So the same thing applies here. I think it's a strong analogy, even though this is many centuries beforehand. The idea is that as a global phenomenon, the idea of trying to establish, even through force of arms, a democratic government was absolutely attractive to all the lefties of the day. They wanted to repress Franco and his forces of fascism, and to support the forces of democracy and freedom. One of the best examples of this was the most famous military component of the Republican Army was called what? Anybody know? Called the Lincoln Brigade, because Lincoln was an international symbol of freedom, of freeing the slaves, and so on and so forth. So this was a perfect name for a pro-Republican military force. And all these folks who got caught up later on in the anti-communism scare were people who had associations, well, at least many of them, if not all of them, with the Lincoln Brigade. Either they gave money to it, or they actually went and they served. And when the anti-communist scare of the 1940s and 50s arose, the connection that the House Un-American Activities Committee tried to demonstrate was that these people had given money to support the things like the Lincoln Brigade, fighting forces, fighting against fascism and the right wing. Okay, I'm sorry we didn't quite get to the end of the section I wanted to today, but I hope it was interesting anyway. And I'm going to get some blood drawn, have some tests done. So I have to close shop for today. I'm sorry about that. But hopefully tomorrow I will be back in the saddle. And thank you all for listening so carefully. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're very welcome.
Kim,
Bye-bye.
can we stay?
Bye all.
Kim, are you, can
Yes. Yes.
I just want to comment on what the rabbi was talking about names, and that really touched me. And they have meaning, the way you was explained that. My name is Remedios, okay? It means remedy. And I did not like my name growing up because it was so bold and masculine. It was not a sweet name like Maria, Judy, melodious name. And over the years, I've come to like my name because I like resolving issues, and even I am the person in the house that likes to pick things. I'm always for anything can be resolved. So as a meaning, and I'm also thinking about the city of Houston. The city of Houston is the most diverse city in the country. And Houston, who befriended the Native Americans, who was very anti-slavery. I sometimes I wonder how the name of the person gets a meaning as it evolves, you know. And why Houston is the most diverse? I said, could it be the founder of Houston? The name Houston is a good guy. He's very anti-slavery. He befriended the Native Americans in Texas. So different from other leaders of Texas like Lamar and other figures I feel like that are very. So I just want to comment on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for allowing me to share that.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. And
See
thank you
ya.
for keeping this group together, Kim. Appreciate it. So we'll
Okay.
see you next week, Thursday.
Yes, yes.
Okay, bye. Have a
Bye.
good week.